Welcome everyone to the latest webinar in our series of webinars as part of the Regional Learning Platform on Care Reform. I'm introducing the webinar today as Mona Aiku, who usually introduces these webinars from the Regional Office for Eastern and Southern Africa, is on annual leave, so I've stepped in on her behalf. My name is Emily Delap and I'm with the consultancy firm Child Frontiers, and we've been supporting the establishment of this regional learning platform. I can see many familiar faces popping up in the chat box and the participant list, so it's great to welcome you all, and also some new people. Just to explain that those are new to these webinars, this is part of a regional learning platform on care reform across the whole of Eastern and Southern Africa, which is giving governments, UNICEF staff, NGO partners an opportunity to exchange learning on different aspects of care reform. And the platform was set up by the Regional Office in Eastern and Southern Africa for UNICEF and by the organisation Changing the Way We Care. Before we get started, if you could please introduce yourselves in the chat box, just give your name, the country that you're from and which organisation you work for. It's extremely helpful for us to see who's on the call so that we can get a sense of who's receiving the information that we're sharing. We're going to, Ishmael in a minute, my colleague from Child Frontiers, is going to give you a brief overview of the webinar. But just to explain right from the start that we tend to take questions right at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions, please do pop them into the chat box as they occur, and we'll come back to them at the end. And you can also raise your hands at the end if you've got questions you'd like to ask verbally. Okay, if you're able to, please put yourselves on mute. And as I've mentioned already, place your name and introduce yourself in the chat box. That would be fantastic. And finally, if you haven't figured it out already, these are the instructions for interpretation. So you'll see an icon at the bottom of the screen, and if you hover over that and then click the interpretation button and then choose your language, and then if you don't want to hear the other language being spoken simultaneously, you can press mute original audio. That's wonderful. Okay. I'm just going to hand over now to my colleague Ishmael, who's going to be running this webinar, and he will start give an outline of the webinar and introduce some of the great speakers that we've got coming along today. Over to you, Ishmael.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for making time for this webinar. Some of you are joining even on short notice, so we are very grateful that you could make time for this. During today's webinar, we are going to focus on transformation of residential care. Of course, sometimes the word transformation and transition are used interchangeably, but we all agree that a lot of efforts underway across the Eastern and Southern Africa, to reform or to transform residential care. And of course, this builds on the decade of research which suggests that children need families to thrive, but also, practice experience from countries which shows that, of course, it's more cost-effective to care for children in families rather than in institutional care. Of course, different countries have different experiences, so we'll listen to different speakers today, sharing their experience around the transformation process, the challenges they experienced, what they would do differently, but also, most importantly, some of the factors that enabled or facilitated the transitional process. And to get into the webinar, I think I'll be introducing each of the speakers they come in. We have Rebecca, who has graciously accepted to join us today and will be speaking to us about some of the emerging lessons and ongoing efforts and work to ensure effective transitioning of residential care. Rebecca is a senior technical advisor for Better Care Network, and she has over 20 years of experience in international development and child protection. A lot of her work has focused on deinstitutionalization, promoting family-based care, as well as community-led development. And a lot of you have listened to her speak before, or if not, you've read some of her, groundbreaking work in this space. Rebecca spent about 11 years in Cambodia, where she supported the development of the country's first formal family-based care program, and she has extensive network of family strengthening projects across different countries. So without further ado, I would like to invite Rebecca to share what she has for us today. Rebecca, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ismail, and it's great to be with you, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this webinar today. I'm just going to share my screen with you, if that is okay, and hopefully that has come out clearly, and just go through some of the learning, as Ismail said, that is emerging from a lot of the collective work that's being done by the community who's really focusing on the transition of residential care facilities. So I have, amongst my different responsibilities, the privilege of facilitating or co-facilitating the global working group on transition, which is housed within the Transforming Children's Care Collaborative, which many of you are probably a part of or aware of. And over the last few years, under the Transitioning Working Group, we have been focusing quite a lot on documenting practices and learning and building consensus around within the sector around exactly what do we mean when we say transition of residential care? What does that term entail? What are the range of phases and stages and processes that may need to be employed in a transition process to ensure that it is safe and effective? And what are the emerging notions of good practice, particularly when it comes to strategic planning and tailoring approaches to supporting individual residential care facilities to undergo that transition process? And so much of this work has resulted in the development of a key set of evidence-based resources that we refer to as the transition framework tools. And this includes 3 key evidence-based tools that you can see on your screen here. The first being the interactive phases of transition diagram. And that's outlined there on the right-hand side of your screen. And really what it does is it breaks the whole transition process down into key phases, right from the engaging with stakeholders and securing buy-in for the process of change, right through to the implementation, the social work and case management processes to reintegrate children back into families or placement in more suitable and family-based alternative care. And each one of those stages and phases that you see on the screen there, you can click into that in order to access a lot more information about what might happen in that particular stage. And there are a lot of resources that have been developed by a range of organizations, including some on this call, that they have generously given access to so that that can support practitioners to implement those different components of a transition process. The second tool is the Transitioning Models of Care Assessment tool. And you can see that in the blue box there. And that is a risk and readiness assessment tool that helps practitioners make sense of a lot of information you can gather about a transition and stakeholders in order to understand how high the risks are, how ready they are or how unready they are for transition, and how to develop a unique and tailored strategy to support them in a way that is safe and effective. And the third tool there is the Transitioning Residential Care Cost Estimation tool, which is a tool that can be used to generate an estimation of what the budget implications are for the transition of any given residential care facility. And it helps practitioners and the stakeholders in residential care to understand where the spikes in costs may occur along the transition journey why they may occur, and it allows them to input their own data in order to generate an estimation that's relevant to them based on their size and a range of other factors that can help them with planning, with getting their boards over the line to agree to transition, and making sure that they have the financial resources to implement safely and effectively throughout the process. So these are all open source tools that are designed to support practitioners in particular who are providing that technical support, coaching, mentoring, helping to secure agreements for transition from RCI stakeholders to commence the process. They've also been used by a number of different countries to inform the development of their closure and transition standard operating procedures and the development of national or provincial action plans to scale back the number of residential care facilities in operation. Now, in addition to gathering a lot of learning and research to understand what needs to be included in some of these framework tools, as a community of practitioners, we have been able to conduct a number of country-level studies to start to gain insight into what enables and what constrains transition, particularly when a country is going from the process of engaging individual residential care institutions to trying to scale that up at a national level. And we're at the point now where we're able to analyze across learnings and start to extract some of the key elements and look at the trends and implications and understand what they mean in terms of developing strategy. So I'm going to run you through a few graphics that give you a little bit of a sense of what's coming out of some of that learning, but we don't have time to go into all of it in depth, but I'm very happy to share this presentation afterwards for those who may want to look at it further. So the first set of learning and the extraction of that information from across country level research and from case studies as well is we're beginning to understand the picture of what are the different factors that affect transition and create that enabling environment for transition, including to enable it to be scaled. And what we're seeing is that there are different factors that sit at the different levels. There are factors in the blue ring that are macro level factors. They are factors that relate to the system. And there are a number of key elements that we're starting to understand really create an enabling environment. And those are all the ones in the white cards located in the blue ring. Then there are also, apologies. Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Then there are also factors that you can see in the orange cards, and they are factors that constrain transition. They include things like attitudes towards residential care, lax implementation of regulation, or a lack of involvement of mandated authorities in implementing laws and regulations. So when we're looking at a macro system, we can start to understand what do we need to strengthen in order to enable transitions to be reached at scale? What factors do we need to understand are in place that may constrain, and how do we address them through communications campaigns, behaviour change campaigns, through strengthening regulation? We're also understanding, though, that there are factors that sit in this micro level ring, and they are unique to the stakeholders who have the decision-making power about transitioning a specific residential care facility. They are things like motivations, obligations and loyalty, having a clear vision for the future, their receptivity to change, how feasible they believe a transition to be, the presence or absence of concepts like othering or senses of psychological ownership. Also the presence of patrons, where the patron-client relationships are influencing the way facilities are operating, their financial capacity to transition, and whether or not there may be criminal conduct that's occurred in the institution that they may wish to prevent a disclosure around that might inhibit their ability to move forward. So we're seeing that there are all of these different factors, and there's a relationship between these factors. So what we're seeing is that if you look on the left-hand side, the stronger the external factors are, the more of those elements are present, the less of the constraining elements that are present. Then on the right-hand side, the less impact the internal factors have on moving a transition forward and how it will actually be implemented. Whereas the reverse is also true. The weaker the macro system is, the less there are enabling factors present or they're poorly implemented, then the stronger the influence of the internal factors are, and the more that practitioners need to engage with those internal factors in order to secure agreement for transition and in order to progress a transition forward. So part of what we're understanding is that strategies need to look at how much do you focus on the macro system in order to weaken the influence of the internal factors, because that tends to take a lot of time and resource and can be quite volatile in trying to move transition forward. So there's a relationship between these two factors. The other thing that we're starting to understand is that there is a need to use the learning and the information that is coming out to start to learn how to categorize and target RCIs, particularly again, as we move from individual transitions to national or subnational strategies to scale up transition. And so there are a number of factors that need to be thought about in the categorization and targeting of RCIs. The first one is the nature of the system at large in that particular country or area, whether it sits more in this kind of parallel or shadow state system that's unregulated, highly privatized, and tends to be foreign funded, or whether it sits more on this state controlled side where residential care tends to fall underneath the regulatory oversight of the government pretty squarely. And that's the first level of categorization. The second level of categorization is about understanding that stakeholders involved in residential care don't gravitate to change equally. This picture you can see now represents an adopters of change theory curve, which many of you may have come across. It's not unique to our sector, but it's very relevant to the issue of transition. Many of the earlier transitions of residential care that we saw across the world in various countries were the innovators and the early adopters. And yet what we're understanding now is we can't develop strategies that solely target those groups of people because they respond to very different catalysts and very different stimulus to say the early majority or the late majority. And so you can see on the top of that diagram, the percentages that only 15% of RCI stakeholders will fall in that innovator category, whereas 70% are going to fall in the middle and 15% are going to fall in the category of laggards. And so understanding that helps us to identify and categorize, because the strategy we need to employ to transition a residential care facility also depends on where in this adoption to change curve that the stakeholders might lie. The types of things that will convince them to change are very, very different. The next factor that we're understanding has a strong influence on categorization is risk and readiness. And I mentioned earlier that the assessment tool actually facilitates a risk and readiness assessment, but also regulatory system data, your inspection data, your MOU or registration data can help to actually categorize residential facilities in this way as well. And this is about understanding which facilities, which stakeholders are ready to change and where the risks are low and therefore change is both likely, feasible and highly effective. And where there are higher levels of risks, that mean we have to employ a very different approach and strategy towards how we transition them. And in many cases, target them for closure rather than full transition into other services. So they need to categorize residential care based on their risk and their readiness rating. And then the last factor that influences categorization that's coming out of all of the learning is their compliance with legal and regulatory systems. And this is really about bringing transition strategies into alignment with regulatory systems so that they're connected to the systems level strengthening efforts. And understanding that we target different RCIs differently based upon whether or not they're fully compliant with law, and therefore the transition is entirely voluntary, whether or not there are gaps in their conformity with law and regulation, which means they may need to be given notice to either improve their standards or to move into a mandatory closure category, or whether or not the risks and the lack of compliance with regulation and standards is so problematic, it's such a high risk level that they need to be flagged for mandatory closure, which is an entirely different process to, say, a category A voluntary transition. So these are sort of the range of factors that the various research is telling us we need to look at and examine in order to create categorization and targeting strategies. And so what we can do with that learning is really start to position different RCIs based on rapid assessments in different categories and develop tailored and unique strategies that not only will enhance the effectiveness of those transitions, but will also help to facilitate much more appropriate and much more cohesive government and CSO collaboration around the technical support provided. For example, it's very appropriate for CSOs to provide a lot of technical support to a green light residential care facility that is transitioning voluntarily, whereas government may need to take a stronger lead in RCIs that are categorized as red light and require more of a mandatory closure protocol, as there may be very high level of risk or criminal conduct may have been established within that particular institution. So again, it's about bringing this learning out and saying, how do we actually use it to enhance the strategies we employ nationally or subnationally to scale up the amount of transition that is taking place? And again, locating it underneath the regulatory system to make sure that it is not happening as a siloed process, that it's contributing towards the building of sustainable child protection and care systems for children. And the last thing I want to draw your attention to in terms of the work that's happening in this regard and some of the learning is right now there is a small community of practitioners and experts in this space who have formed a task force also as a part of the Transforming Children's Care Collaborative. And the task force is working on the development of a thematic brief on the transition of residential care services that brings together a lot of this learning and provides very concrete, very practical recommendations to governments and policymakers to look at how they can actually create enabling environments for transition within their countries, what strategies they can employ to scale up and develop national or subnational plans, and how they can lean upon concepts of best practice or good practice in order to and use the tools that are available to safely and effectively transition individual residential care facilities within their country. And so we're expecting that thematic brief to come out in the coming months and very much looking forward to being able to share that with all of you and hopefully to support the implementation of that thematic brief in various countries. So I will stop there, but once again, recognize that there's a lot of content in those slides, but just wanting to give you an overview and happy to share those afterwards. Thank you, Ismail.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for condensing a 3-month course into a couple of minutes. I think this is very, very interesting, and it brings to light several process issues, but also issues related to individual motivations and attitudes, but also how to embed, transformation into the wider care system reform. And it's also very interesting that, even with the same information, the transformation process might be different in different countries, but even within the country, especially if and oftentimes some people are early adopters and others are laggards. So it's interesting to see how that dynamic plays out and how the different considerations that are required when you engage with such facilities to transform. So we are privileged to have you, and thank you very much. I'm sure the group has a lot of questions, but we'll come to that later. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now we're going to have to the panel discussions, and with the discussion, we are going to listen to two very wonderful people about their experiences with transition. One is from Zambia. He's called Mr. Banda Jeremiah, who is the program director for the Zambia Association of Sisterhood. And Banda is a firm believer and a passionate advocate for family-based care, and he's been in this position as program director since 2017. And within that period, the Zambia Association of Sisterhood has worked with over 39 Catholic affiliated childcare facilities under the Catholic Care for Children project, which is co-implemented with the Catholic Relief Service. Specifically during this session, he will speak to us particularly about two institutions. One is Kaoma, Cheshire Home, as well as the Flamboyant Home. He will tell us about the process, the factors that enabled or facilitated the transition process and what they would do different. But we'll also, as part of the panel discussion, listen to Mediasi, who is a legal representative of Kweva Mwana, an organization or a facility for children with disability that transitioned into a daycare center, and all children were reintegrated into their families. So I'll start off with Mr. Banda, Jeremiah. Thank you for making time. I hope you can switch on your video and people have a nice look at you. So briefly, tell us about your work, especially around transitioning the Catholic affiliated childcare facilities and what the transformation process was like. What steps did you generally take in working with these facilities?
Thank you very much, Ishmael. As he has explained, I am Jeremiah Banda. I work with the Catholic sisters in the country. And as you know, in Zambia, the Catholic Church owns almost 31% of all the orphanages. And so when we had the transformation agenda, the care reforms agenda, we were already running a project called Catholic Care for Children project. And previously, this project was just to make sure that the children that are in the residential care have better facilities, nice food, accommodation, and shelter. There was no agenda to think of really placing them back into their families and see whether they can be supported from their families. And so in 2017, with funding from GHR Foundation, we started a pilot project to try and see and do case studies on how we can reintegrate children that are in the childcare facilities into their families. And so during this period, 2017 to 2020, we piloted 4 childcare facilities to try and see and build evidence whether truly reintegration was possible. Because as it stands now, there are a lot of mixed feelings and also misconception with regard to whether we can really support children from home. So now in Mazabuka, the Flamboyant Home, we had 67 children who were under institutional care. So when we started sitting down with the parish council, and also we formed the district case review committee to look at each case of the child that was in the child care facility. And also we developed the permanent plan in accordance to what we are calling now alternative care guidelines, which is a policy guideline by the government in response to child care reforms. So now we started actually assessing the children to see the possibility of placing them back into their families. And one wonderful thing that happened was that in the Flamboyant Home, almost all the children who were under residential care had biological families who were still alive, and other families were still doing well. So from assessing the children, we started also family tracing and also family assessment. And those families that we found that they had challenges in taking back their children, we had to thought of an economic strengthening interventions, whereby we trained them into having some basic of business management and entrepreneurship, Others, we gave them like food packet support and also a seed, a packet support during a farming season so that they can be able to cultivate and grow food of their own and later on take back these children into their families. And now, after 1 year of strengthening families, we started placing back these children into their families, and we started directing support to the families. And the reintegration process was very successful because we had changed the perception of the families, the perception of the communities with regard really to whether a child can still be looked after in the family. And so these children have been placed back into their families. We have continued directing the support toward the families. Some of them have completed their education and they are really doing tertiary education and they are thriving in their family environment. And I think this gave us really some kind of an evidence-based data that reintegration is really very possible, and these children that have got families can still be supported and be looked after from home. And so now the facilities that were being used as residential care, we felt that since the parish in Mazabuka, which was running Flamboyant Home, was also running a primary school for the church. And this primary school was just going from year 1 to year 7 or grade 1 to grade 7. And so we thought that in this case, the buildings can be used to expand the primary school so that it can also offer junior secondary education. And as I speak now, I think we have these buildings that are being used to provide for junior secondary education. And also the primary school has been expanded in terms of the streams. Instead of having 2 classes of grade 1 to 7, we're having 3 classes of grade 1 to 7 and 2 classes of grade 8 and 9. And the school is thriving well. We have continued to conduct post-placement services to check on these children that were placed back, how they are doing. And I think they are doing very well. And some of them, the support has even been cut. And we have continued identifying the vulnerable children that may need the support of the facility, but not really being supported from a residential care, but just being supported in their families. So the project has continued in terms of identifying vulnerable children who are being supported from their families. And then still we are conducting assessment and also economic strengthening activities, interventions, so that we can strengthen the family. Okay, with regard to Kaoma Cheshire Home, also the story is more or less the same. I think there was a decision by the Congregation of the Presentation Sisters to say all those children that have got families, we can support them from the family environment. And so we started the same, doing family assessment, child assessment, and also more or less economic strengthening interventions. And for Kaoma Cheshire Homes, the majority of the families live in the villages. And so what they were lacking in terms of economic strengthening was just the support in terms of input, seed, fertilizer, and a bit of money for labor so that they are able to cultivate a larger portion of land, they improve their harvest, and also then they become food secure. And then we have done that. The children who were in Cheshire Home Kaoma were all placed back. And now the facility that has remained is being used as an income generating activity. So we are keeping village chickens, we are keeping pigs, and the part of the buildings is being used to offer boarding facilities to the students that are pursuing nursing and teaching within Kaoma district, and it is raising the income for the facility, and that income for the facility is being used to support these children that have been placed back home. And once in a holiday, like for the Kaoma, we are able to meet these children, interact with them, ask them whether they are having challenges and whether they would like to come back into a residential care facility. But I think the beautiful is that none of them really wants to get back to the child care facility. They are happy to be supported from the family environment. they have gained back like in their family values, they are gained back their mastery, the belonging, and also the independence that they want. Also, I think we see that they are now able to have survival skills that are passed on in a home environment where they are able to do certain chores, they are able to wash, they are able to cultivate, they are able to sweep, they are able just to interact with the entire family community. And I think we see very little traumatized children that now are in the family and they are thriving. And with this, I think what we have done best is to be able to look at the factors that led to family separation. And in most cases, it is really poverty of inability to provide for education and health. And so we have taken care that education and health will be taken care by the project, by the facility. We are taking care of these costs, and the children are thriving in their family environment. And I think also one best practice is to make sure that institutional care is the last resort. We explore options with regard, if we cannot trace a biological family, we look for kinship care or foster to adopt, so that then still that child, even if the child does not have a family, he or she is placed with the extended family under kinship care, or with a foster care family that is willing and is able to take care of them following the legal process provided by the country. So basically, I think these are our two case studies and pilot facilities. And I think going forward now, we have increased the number of facilities that are now placing back children from institutional care into family-based care. And so far in Zambia, we are leading organizations, and even as a Catholic church, because we are known to be really a very like conservative church, very centralized and so on. And slowly, I think the bishops and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church is buying into these care reforms and seeing the importance of really making sure that we together we can place back the children back into the child care facilities. So we are really running this project, and we are hoping that at the end of the day, 50% of our 39 child care facilities will really transition into providing more or less like support from the family-based and like institutional-based care. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Banda. You talked about the legacy of institutionalization before 2017.
Yes.
What sparked the need to first to transform? And also you talked about in the beginning the issue of changing hearts and mind in Zambia towards care reform. How important is that in the transformation process?
It's very, very important. First of all, I think we had to do a lot of advocacy around child care reforms, because now government has come out in the open that they would like all the orphanages that are keeping these children in institutional care to be able to place them back. And to that effect, they have issued us a guideline and a timeline in order to implement that. So we had to engage the Zambia Conference of Catholic Bishops to explain to them the position of the government around care reforms. We had to build capacity of key clergy people, including the major superiors for the women religious, so that we ask for the buy-in. And later on now, we started working with the specific child care facilities to start transitioning bit by bit and to build that evidence from those pilot facilities and share them with the rest of the facilities that were resisting to change. And as a result of these case studies, as a result of having evidence-based data, and the facilities that transition themselves being role models, giving talks, and also really showing evidence of really what has been done, we have seen that many more now are coming on board, including the UISG at international level in Vatican. We were able to be in Italy last year to engage with the Dicastery of Child Protection and the minors and so on. So we are seeing this movement now that is being supported by the high-ranking Catholic officials who are still also championing the agenda of really family-based care.
Thank you so much. And quickly reflecting on all this that you've done, what would you do differently?
What would be done different for now is that we have instituted what we call like CWACs, like community social welfare assistance, that are really now like our gatekeeping kind of mechanism. So we have community structures that are now assessing the families that may have really high levels of child separation, so that the moment that is identified, then the CWAC will report those families to our project, and the project will move in to make sure that we do economic strengthening at that level before even the separation is done. So the grassroots communities that are helping us to gatekeep or to prevent family separation has been our best practice, and this is now what we are riding on to make sure that we are building capacity for the grassroots communities, and these grassroots communities are helping us to reach out to these families that are most highly to have child separation, and then we strengthen the families before the separation is done.
Thank you so much. So now I'll shift to Mediasi, who is a representative from Wikwiheba Mwana organization based in the Eastern Province in Rwanda. So Mediasi, can you hear me very well? Thank you. Nice to see your face. I know that the organization had a center caring for children with disability in Gasibo district. And from what I learned, all children were reintegrated into the family, and currently the center is an inclusive daycare center. Could you just briefly tell us about how you went about the transformation, and what measures did you take during the transformation process to ensure the safety and well-being of the children with disability?
Nitwa Mediatrice Mukasharangabo.
My name is Mediatrice Mukasharangabo.
Ndi representante legal wa Wikwiheba Mwana.
I am the legal representative for Wikwiheba Mwana organization.
Nakoze mu buzima bwanjye, mu byiyumviro byanjye, nari mfite inyota yo gufasha abana bafite ubumuga.
Since my childhood, I inspired to support children with disabilities.
Gushyiraho ikigo cy'abana bafite ubumuga, nabonaga ari cyo cyamfasha, numva ndishimye mbafasha buri munsi.
And putting into place an institution for children .
Yeah, Ishmael, I think we lost the connection there.
Oh, we are back. We are back.
You're back. Oh, wonderful.
Go ahead.
Nitwa Mediatrice Mukasharangabo, nkaba ndi representante legal wa Wikwiheba Mwana inclusive community center.
My name is Mukashiranga Mediatrice. I'm a legal representative of Wikuya Mwabe and an inclusive daycare center.
Mu buzima bwanjye mu bwana bwanjye nari mfite inyota yo kuzafasha abana bafite ubumuga cyane kubera nabonaga abo mpura nabo bagenda mu muhanda ari abasabiriza bafite ubumuga bw'ingingo ari n'abandi batoragura udupapuro numva bimbabaje.
In my life, I inspired to support children with disability because I often was meeting them in street and on street begging, and I inspired just to start an institution for children with disability.
Nuko dushyiraho ikigo dufatanije n'ababyeyi bafite abana bafite ubumuga dushyiraho ikigo kizajya kibakira.
So we started an institution for children with disability with other parents who had children with disability by then.
Hanyuma ku bijyanye na transformation twakiraga abana, icyo nababwira ni uko twakiraga abana bafite ubumuga tukabakira mu kigo, ariko bikaba byari ibintu bivunanye kubera ko bafashwaga n'abakozi batafite ubumenyi.
So we started and started to receive children, but it was so hard because they were supported by staff who were not well trained in terms of supporting children with disabilities, and it was really hard to look after those children.
Ntabwo abo bakozi twabyumvaga kimwe kuko batari bazi uburyo bafata umwana ufite ubumuga n'udafite ubumuga, byose bikaba biri ku mutwe wanjye.
I was often disappointed by the care those staff were providing to those children, and always I was the one going back and see how they can really be supported properly.
Nahoraga nibaza amaherezo y'abo bana babaga mu kigo, nibaza hari abakuraga nkavuga se bazagenda baba abasaza bari muri iki kigo.
So I often ask myself, what would be the end? What would be the end of the children that I'm receiving in my institution? So are they going to be old in remaining in an institution? How will be am I going to manage by the time they will be older?
Haje gahunda y'uko buri mwana w'umunyarwanda agomba kurererwa mu muryango, nahise mbyumva vuba, bituma nabo bamwe dutangira ubwacu kubashakira imiryango basubiramo. Hasigara abana 26 batari babonye imiryango.
So by the time the government introduced the child care reform and started the process of reintegrating children, I received that information positively, and then we started to reintegrate children. By the time I was having 45 children, and I started myself to reintegrate children, but the government and other partners joined when I was having like 26 children remaining in the institution.
Gusa nagize ikibazo cyo kubyumvisha abakozi n'ubugenda n'byakiriye neza, abakozi n'abandi banyamuryango dufatanije.
It was a challenge to initiate my initiative to the staff and the collaborative that I was having, like partners that we were being together in running the institution. It was really tough for them to understand that we have to reintegrate children back in family-based care.
Tugira amahirwe tubona umufatanyabikorwa ariwe Open Homes for Children.
So we were lucky enough to have a partner that will come along and support us to reintegrate children, which is Open Homes for Children.
Ifatanije na leta.
Alongside with the government as well.
Harimo NCPD.
Can I see now like NCPD, National Council for Children, Person with Disability?
NCDA.
National Child Development Agency.
Basobanurira abakozi imihindukire y'imikorere, ukuntu imikorere ihindutse, abana bazajya bafashwa ku manywa.
So they trained the staff to understand what will be the transformation. Like we are no longer going to have a residential institution, but a center that will be receiving children at a daily basis, and they will be returning to their homes.
Abana 26 Open Homes for Children yasanze mu kigo basubizwa mu miryango.
Then 26 children and younger persons with disability that were remaining in institution were successfully reintegrated back in family-based care by Open Homes for Children and the government.
haza abo muri community bafite ubumuga.
So that we started to receive children from the community that are having disability as well, at the surrounding community.
Bahabwa ubufasha nk'ubugororangingo, physiotherapy.
So we started to provide services for those children with disabilities such as physiotherapy, special education,
bavuzwa n'indwara zo mu mutwe.
and being linked to the hospitals as well.
Ingamba rero twashyizeho mbere yo gusubiza abana iwabo habayeho amahugurwa ku babyeyi kugira ngo bumve uburyo bazakomeza gufasha abana kugira ngo nabo bumve uburenganzira bw'umubyeyi ku mwana we.
So the measures that we put into place before the reintegration, we started by training parents to understand the rights of children and how they have to be looking after children.
Nibwo ababyeyi bahugurwaga mu bijyanye na physiotherapy.
Parents were trained in terms of physiotherapy.
Babasobanurira uburyo bazajya bakomeza gufata imiti y'indwara zo mu mutwe.
And they were explained how children will be taking medication for those who are under medical care.
Aho umwana yahuzwaga n'ibitaro bimwegereye kugira ngo azashobore gukomeza gufashwa.
So children before the reintegration, they were linked to hospital nearby their homes so that they can be following medication and physiotherapy as well.
Kugira ngo adasubira inyuma. Hakorwa babahugura kuri physiotherapy kugira ngo batongere bagahinamirana.
They were trained in physiotherapy to support their children in their homes.
Hanyuma umuphysiotherapist akomeza kujya mu miryango abakurikirana akareba ko ababyeyi babikora neza batakora nabi kugira ngo batabamugaza.
So by the time children were integrated in family-based care, our physiotherapists were going back to their families to see whether parents are putting into place what they were taught, they were trained.
Ikindi ni uko abafatanyabikorwa Hope and Homes for Children na leta NCDA bakomeza kubakurikirana bakabafasha ni ubufasha bukenerwa kugira ngo umwana akomeze amererwe neza iyo yo gusubira inyuma yo kwiheba.
Another thing it is we keep on monitoring the well-being of those children, but also the government and National Child Development Agency and National Council for Persons with Disabilities, they keep on the monitoring. They keep on the monitoring to see whether those children are well treated in their homes. They do monitoring at a regular basis.
Hakaba n'inzego z'ibanze zibakurikirana, inshuti z'umuryango zikora akazi keza. Ntitwirengagiza ntabwo twakwirengagiza ko hari NCPD coordinators.
So and we cannot, or the local leaders as well who support children. We cannot forget friends of families. One of the community scheme that are looking after children who are placed in family-based care. But also we cannot forget to mention that for children with disabilities, there is a national the National Council for Persons with Disabilities committees at community level who do monitoring as well.
Nabo bakomeza kubakurikirana.
They
Twizeye ko abo bana bameze neza.
And they do a really good monitoring about those children, and we know they are well treated in their families. So mostly that's what I intend to share.
So
that's
thank you
the process that
thank
I
you
want to share.
so much. And just a quick question. In terms of sustainability, how do you work out a way to ensure that children that have been placed back in their families continue to receive the necessary support?
ni ukubahuza n'ibitaro kugira ngo bakurikiranwe imiti n'abakoreshwa ubugororangingo nabo badahinamirana niba yaravuye mu kigo atangiye kugendera ku mbago nadakomeza imyitozo azongera amavi yongera ahine ibyo ngibyo nicyo kintu dukurikirana.
So the first and important thing that we do, it is the linkage to nearby hospitals that are around where the children were placed to make sure children are getting the support they need in terms of physiotherapy, so that they cannot backsliding and get their body. So they get a continuous support in terms of getting physiotherapy and medication as well. It is more just of linking the children and their families to the hospitals that are nearby where they are living.
Ikindi ni uko akarere tuzi neza dukorana nabo, tukaba tuzi ko akarere hari serivisi igenda ikareba niyo babona ibiryo ku buryo batakwicwa n'inzara ngo bigunge, ahubwo leta nayo irabakurikirana iri maso nayo.
And another thing is we work hand in hand with the government through the district, and we know there are kind of support that they might be receiving from the district, and this is really very important to have the government supporting children within the families that have been being reintegrated in family-based care.
Kandi nanone turacyakorana n'umufatanyabikorwa Hope and Homes for Children ku buryo abo bana basubijwe mu miryango, yaba umwana ukeneye operasiyo cyangwa kujyanwa mu ishuri, uwo mufatanyabikorwa aradufasha.
So we're still working with a partner, Hope and Homes for Children, who's supporting to make sure children are getting proper medication and physiotherapy where it is really needed in terms of money, and we keep on working together and see at any extent where children need such kind of support.
And how many children are currently in the inclusive daycare center?
Harimo abana 120, abafite ubumuga ni 84, abadafite ubumuga ni 36.
So we have now 120 children who are attending the daycare center. So children with disabilities are 86, and children without disability are 34.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, we appreciate Madresi, and thank you, John. Is it John? Yes. For that wonderful translation. We're going to go to Monique, brother, sorry. And it goes back to the discussion that and some of the issues that Rebecca raised in her opening remarks around the factors that influence transition. And she talked about the macro level factors, and what we learn from the transition is that policy influences transition only when it's backed by strong government demonstration of commitment to implementation, but also the need to link transition to wider care system reform effort. So I'm going to invite Monique to share with us the linkage between ongoing residential care transformation efforts in Rwanda and wider care reform efforts, as well as what the government of Rwanda is doing to scale up some of the practices emerging in the transition process. Monique is a social worker and also currently the acting program manager for the TMN program. Monique, you're most welcome.
Hello to everyone. Yes, I'm going to talk about the linkage of transformation of the digital care to system level reform in Rwanda. And let's put my video. I forget to put it. Yes. And as you all know, here in Rwanda, we no longer have orphanage for children because we advocate and we're advancing quite alternative care for children. And we started by we start to build our child care system from the integration of children from orphanage into families. I see my slide is not moving. I don't know what happened. Maybe I can stop sharing and start.
You're fine, Monique. We can see you moving. Carry on.
It's moving?
Yeah, you're good. Yeah. Oh, do you mean your PowerPoint presentation? Okay.
Let's start again to share again.
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay. But it doesn't move to the second slide, but
Monique, I have your PowerPoint, so I could share that and see if I can get it moving. You just give me.
I already shared with this Maya, but don't know if.
Yeah, I have it downloaded, so just let me.
Okay. Yeah, I see it started to move. What we're going to see, my presentation is short. We're going to see the overview of the linkage between residential care transformation and the wider care reform here in Rwanda, and how the government of Rwanda is promoting this good practice across the country. As I said before, we started this journey, what I can say, in 2012. Where the government adopted what we call the Strategy for National Child Care Reform. And this process, when it started, it was adopted by the cabinet. Then we put in place this program of Tuware Muryango program, which was an implementation framework for this strategy. At the start, we touched by the community awareness and engagement of local leaders, because this was something new. As we saw in the presentation of Rebecca, our situation here in Rwanda, all institutions were run by private, and most of them were funded by people from abroad, even Samada from the country. That's why we need to raise this awareness to understand the interest or the importance of raising children into families. We engage local leaders, religious leaders, and the whole community, and also even the families, because the family who have the children into institutions or orphanage, they don't understand why the government is starting taking back children into their families, because they want their children to go. They think the children gain better or are better cared than institutions. After this community awareness, it takes time through different meetings. That's the next step was to train or to put in place the workforce, because this program starts with different professional workforce. They were social workers and psychologists, because we know that institutions or these orphanages have had effect on the children, and also have these social workers to continue to work with the children and even the families, and to design an intervention plan. Also, we have other workforce. These social workforce were at the level, or these social workers and psychologists were at the level of district, but we want to have other workforce at the level of the lowest level of administration, which is the village. Is where we have what we call inshuti z'umuryango or friends of family. They were selected, trained, and on how they can support children into their families. After putting in place or having this social workforce, what I can say at the level of professional and these para social workers at the level of the community, then we go for the case management and the placement. This was, we have the different people who came in the place. We have UNICEF who fund this the process, who at the first time was supporting social workforce for the training and the placement and also their capacity building. Then we start to place children from orphanage into their families. And here we worked most of the time with, yes, we have this social workforce, but also the role of government and the local leaders were very important, and even the institution managers. Then we have how to monitor these children after placement. We need to see, to collect the data, to share their experience, and also to continue post-placement follow-up, because after placement, we don't close the case. We continue to monitor till we make sure the children will remain in their families, and also to identify other children who may be at risk of separating. Because as we see, we don't want, when we start this care reform, we don't want new entries into orphanage or into centers. After go through all this process, we see, yes, all children have already reintegrated into their families. And here, before we worked with orphanage, where we have a few children who have disabilities, but we didn't touch in the first phase of this program, touching 2 centers caring children with disabilities. But when we arrived in 2017, we conduct a TMM evaluation or a program evaluation, and we see that these children have been left behind, and those we used to work with in the orphanage, we tried to use the case management forms that we had, but it was not working very. It was very hard because it was not adapted. That's why we want also to adapt our tools in 2019, and we start to integrate children from also centers caring children with disabilities, because we want to make our care reform more inclusive. That's where in Rwanda we start in the community, where because we want to make our community safe and able to care all these children with disabilities and those children without disabilities. That's why in this second phase, when we start to go for these centers, we also we adapt tools, and then we train again our staff, our professionals, or our workforce, social workforce, on the integration of children with disabilities, on the integration of children with the particular or we emphasize on children with disabilities. Here, what I can say in Rwanda, we are in a good process, and all of them will hear about the CHOGM, which in 2020, where we adopt the Declaration of Child Care and Protection Reform, and raising awareness on child care reform, because we want all 56 countries which made the Commonwealth community, they adopt this declaration, but we want to continue to raise awareness, where we want the children to be adopted, raised into families, or to replace institutional care by quite alternative care. But here in Rwanda, we promote, we emphasize family-based care. We have this declaration, which is already adopted and signed. Then we have all of us the commitment to put in place all necessary frameworks and resources to develop child protection and safeguarding system to care and protection of children. From this care reform, now in Rwanda, we are developing, we are putting in place the child protection case management system, where we will make sure every child protection concern is well treated, is well solved and treated, and children who have been who are victim of abuse, different type of abuse, violence, neglect, exploitation, abandonment, have are supported and restored for their well and well development. And this care, we are lucky because we have also started to be implemented, and currently in February, we have the first round table where they start to discuss how can we implement this Kigali Declaration. Every country, yes, they have some policies, they have some activities, that they start to work in terms of or in relation with this care reform, and even here in Rwanda, and that's our way to continue to expand this child care reform to make sure our children are more and well protected. They are well and better served. When I come back to transformation of the residential care in Rwanda, as my colleague Beatrice said, yes, so Wikwihabamwana was one of the residential care caring children with disabilities that have reintegrated children. We have others, we have here in Kigali, we have one in the Kicukiro district, we have in the south, we have another institutions, and even east. We start to integrate children with disabilities into their families, and we take this together with the community also to transform our community by making it able to care our children and provide services to the children with disabilities. All of these institutions, orphanages, all of them have already transformed into community sources. Most of them are child-centered services. They serve many children from the community, where most of them have become ECDs, ECD centers, others are schools, other youth centers. Most of them are serving children. Others become different schools. You have secondary, you have also vocational training schools in these different, all these for all these residential facilities. As you hear, even we have already transformed 2 institutions who have been caring children with disabilities. We have one, we have also our friends in the Kicukiro district, where we put in place a day care center who serve many children with disabilities and those without disabilities in the community. Children, they come to the center, then they go back to their families, and the families and the parent get time to work or to undergo other activities while their children are being cared in those their care centers. The government also put in place the policy framework to transform or to close these facilities. That's why here the government of Rwanda is encouraging, is mobilizing these institutional managers, but it helps and it supports, because as I said before, all these institutions, all these facilities are private owned, but the government supports to provide the requirement necessary when the institutional manager wants to transform, want to change its buildings. Somewhere we build, or we refurbish, or we transform, or the existing ones together with the institutional managers. But the idea, the view of the institutional managers is considered, because they are the one, they are supported in which they want to do. Then inclusive of the AI of children to family-based care, it continues. Now, as I said before, we started with the 4 piloting institutions. Now we have already expanded, and we already add 4 institutions again. And we are lucky here in Rwanda, most of centers caring children with disabilities, as Beatrice said, as this is the government of Rwanda agenda, most of the social managers have started to integrate children with disabilities into their families. But those who remain, there are few, and we have staff. And these, most of them, they have some complicated cases, but we are working together to see how those who can live in their families go for families, and those who can remain here. What I want to mention again, we have minimum standard for these institution care, who may institution facilities, who may remain for children in needs, so that they have this standard that they have to be standardized, and they have this document, and this they have document that, and also indicators that will be guided these institutions. When I come back to the achievement of the program, from 2012, as I say, till now, end March, we have already integrated 3,482 children to families. This, we have those from orphanage, and these from centers, from centers caring children with disabilities. Now we have already in place 68 professionals, social workers and psychologists at the district level, who have the capacity to support this institution, to support this activity, this care reform. We transform the existing orphanage and also these centers based on the community structures. They are serving children, many children from the community. We continue also to support vulnerable families, children from vulnerable families, financially, they provide psychosocial support. We have also, because we don't want to, we want to avoid family separation. As you know, as I said before, here in Rwanda, since 2012, we don't allow new entries. That's why we continue to put emphasis on the support, on the identification of families at risk, and the support of vulnerable families as a prevention activity, main of the program prevention activities, to avoid the new entries or new separation of children with their families. We continue to follow children who have been reintegrated. Yes, from those from orphanage, we still have few caseload, but we have to continue also to make a follow-up of these children with disabilities together with the others. But it is a continuous activity. So we continue to make a regular follow-up to identify, to monitor the rights of these children who have already integrated into families, but also to identify, to know families who are at risk for being separated with their families. Our main objective is the integration of children from institution into family care into their families, whether biological, extended, or foster families, and also to build or strengthen the child protection and the care system in Rwanda. As I said before, yes, we started with these children from orphanage, but also we want to continue to build our system, our child protection system, which is functional here in Rwanda, starting on this care reform. How do we promote our good practice? We are strengthening the inclusive prevention, strengthening inclusive and prevention of family separation. Our entry point to strengthen the broader child protection system in Rwanda, we have this workforce. This is social workers and psychologists, and these parasocial workers at the grassroots level, at the village level. Now we are lucky because as you remember, I said that we start this program with the support from UNICEF and the other partners, Open Homes for Children, World Vision, different Save the Children. But now, as this is the government agenda, and it has also committed to have this system in the child protection system in place. These social workforce, most of them started working as a contractual staff, but now we have already 22 who have been absorbed by the government. Now they are on the payroll of the government. They are being supported by the government. And we hope even others who left, 36, will be also absorbed, because they know what their role in child protection system here and in Rwanda. We have already these child protection community volunteers, our friends of family. I have 2 at each village, a man and a woman, and these one they continue to have regular capacity building, and they serve children from the village level, which is the smallest, or the level which is near, which is the first level administrative entity level, where all parents are living there because they live and they work together. Also, we have started, as I said before, child protection case management framework, already developed and adopted in 2002. And we hope this will continue to help us to make our child protection system more functional and strong. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Monique. Very interesting, but in the interest of time, I see that Mr. Banda is off, but I will request Rebecca. There are a couple of questions in the chat. So if you could kindly respond to those that you can. I can see we almost running out of time. That would appreciate. Rebecca, so are there any particular questions you want to take on before we wrap up?
I can see a couple there and I'll respond to them very quickly. There was one in there asking a question about the case management and whether the cost estimation tool helps to estimate the cost of that. The answer is that it does. It covers case management. It also covers anticipating the cost of whether that case management process will be outsourced or whether it will be implemented internally by the existing staff of the residential care facility. And it also has another section that looks at the anticipation of having to bring on additional social workers as another spike cost. So it does have information. It has a section in there that allows you to estimate those costs. And it also has a section in there around costing out family support and costing out aftercare support for care leavers as well. So you can have a look at the link I posted in the chat to have a better look at that tool and see exactly the different domains that it covers. There was a second question in there about the adopters of change, and given that only 15% of people are innovators, the need to look at advocacy efforts across different platforms. That's absolutely correct. What we're noticing is that for those who fit in the early average, late average category, they require a lot more external pressure. So they require some constraint exercised on their decision making by way of regulation or the enforcement of law to help them to understand that staying as they are isn't an option, that there will be changes and those changes will impact them, at which point they then start to gravitate towards change and agree to change. Whereas the laggards tend to require that, enforced closure process. So it does show you that you can't just develop strategies that gear towards innovators because they're too small a percentage to affect wider spread change. I think they were the only questions posed to me. Is that right? Or have I missed anything?
I think you've answered most of the question. And in the newsletter that was sent out, a lot of the resources and the links to the tool are provided. So kindly just look back on the newsletter that was sent ahead of this webinar, and you'll see a lot of the tools that Rebecca is mentioning. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you, Monique, and thank you, Jesse, for making time to share your insights, but also your wonderful knowledge of this. I hope this session has been informative to everyone, as it has been for me. I'll hand over to Emily.
Thank you, Ishmael. I'm just going to launch a very quick poll so we can try and find out a bit more about who's on the call. If you can just answer that while I'm speaking, I'd be really grateful. I'm sorry that we didn't have quite enough time to get to all the Q&A, but as Ishmael mentioned, we'll share a recording of this webinar and some further resources on this important topic in our newsletter, and Bertha has been sharing throughout this webinar details of how you can sign up to the newsletter. So we'll also make sure that we share that again. Thank you to the panelists and the speakers. It was a really fantastic set of presentations and discussions. It was great to have that global perspective, some real practitioner perspectives, and then that governmental scaling perspective. So I felt it was a really, really helpful webinar, and everyone presented excellently. Our next webinar will be at the end of May, date to be confirmed. And this webinar will be on care leavers, and we'll try and bring in that balance again with a combination of care leavers themselves speaking and some research on, we'll present also some research findings on peer-to-peer research by care leavers to examine some of their needs and how they feel they should be brought into care reform processes. And I think that is everything. We have a new publication that we launched just this week on climate change and care reform. So again, if you I think Bertha's going to be sharing some links for that presentation shortly in the chat, and you can also search for that on the Regional Learning Platform landing page on both the Better Care Network site and the Regional Learning UNICEF's regional office site as well. Okay, thank you for everyone that's taken part in this webinar, and we hope to see you along at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.